Thank the chairman. Appreciate y'all being here and for the work as my friend from Kentucky pointed out in getting these bills produced. I will echo the sentiment that I wish we were doing this in June or July. I think we should have been in here, and I think we should have stayed here in August. But we're here, and hopefully we can do our work this week and get where we need to go for the betterment of the people that we represent. My friend from Florida. A quick question. Our colleague from Colorado was inquiring about cuts to our engagement in Africa, and one of the points was about China's engagement there. Would the gentleman agree that China's engagement worldwide has not necessarily resulted in the highest quality products? In fact, the Wall Street Journal recently had an expose and a report of the extent to which their projects are falling apart. They're, in the words of the Wall Street Journal, their belt and road infrastructure projects are plagued with construction flaws and so forth. In other words, a race to beat China for beating China's sake and their engagement abroad does not necessarily mean that we need to appropriate dollars to dump into projects to do that. Rather, we should just do our work at the right level with the right quality and do our thing, and then essentially kind of let China hang itself there a little bit. You follow me? That's something I read in the journal just recently.
No, actually, that is the experience a lot of countries have with China because, they go in not to be helpful. They go in to not even, make a profit. They go in there to raid and to just pull out. So you're absolutely right. And which is why this bill emphasizes standing up to China. One thing that I did not mention, for example, we require the Secretary of State to counter China's treatment in international organizations as a quote-unquote, developing nation. It's about time we start taking, let's take China seriously. It's also about time that we don't continue to just send money just because we've always done it. It's not only, by the way, sir, that we are, for example, eliminating funds for institutions that are ineffective, but doing so is not only helping our bottom line, it's actually helping our national security interests. Because in some cases, we're actually funding groups, institutions that are not only not helping us, they're actually hurting our national security interests. So I just could not agree with you more on what you've just mentioned about China. And by the way, as you know, sir, China not only does that as far as bad products, et cetera, but they also bribe. And they bribe heads of state. They, around the entire world, I'm assuming they've never bribed any high people here in this country, but they bribe heads of state, family members of heads of state, of high-level folks. That's how they do business. And so we got to take China seriously. This bill does it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Bribery with, gold plates or gold bars with certain numbers stamped in them, for example. Let me ask another question on some of these matters. The kinds of things that your work has resulted in reducing funding to or eliminating funding to, right? Some of the things like the United Nations Population Fund, right, which feeds into China's horrific policies involving abortion and sterilization. For example, the United Nations Human Rights Council. I don't have the list in front of me. I could probably pull it up, but they have such august representatives as Cuba, China itself, Sudan, Eritrea, Algeria. The kinds of things that the kinds of places that are maybe not necessarily known for their track record with respect to human rights. And so reducing funding to these organizations, just to put it in stark comparison for the American people watching this, the current regime, the current White House, the current Democrat majority in the Senate, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle here would prefer to continue to fund at not even just these levels, but higher levels, these organizations, these entities worldwide. For example, the World Health Organization, notwithstanding what we just saw unfold with respect to COVID. For example, I believe in this legislation, you prohibit funds going to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the Eco Health Alliance, any gain of function research, and labs in adversarial nations like China, Iran, Russia, North Korea, or Cuba. I suspect that the vast majority of the American people would like us to maybe not play those little reindeer games and resulting in massive shutdowns of their economy and what we just dealt with for the last several years. Would you like to expound on some of those great successes and the work that you did in establishing the priorities that the American people would like to see with reducing their taxpayer dollars and borrowed dollars being wasted pursuing these things.
Sir, you've said it in a much more eloquent way than I could. But there are so many instances like that frankly you have to scratch your head and say, are we actually funding that? We are, which is why it is so important to move these appropriation bills forward, because otherwise we are stuck with that. Among the other things, by the way, there's another thing here which is very interesting. I know this is kind of a sacred cow, but there are no sacred cows. We are spending, in every subcommittee, in every area of this government, we're spending all this taxpayer money. I would say that we're wasting all this taxpayer money on issues dealing with climate change. And so one of the things that I've got here, which is not a huge issue, it's not real money, is to make sure that we actually have a study, because to find out all that money that's been going out, how much has that actually affected temperature? I think we kind of know the answer to that. It's not going to be much. So what we're trying to do, if I may say so in very simple terms, going back to the basics, this is national security spending. If you're an ally of the United States, as I said before, sir, we try to help you, but efficiently. If you're an enemy, an adversary, we confront you. You're not going to like this bill. And yes, I am not shy about saying that we are cutting spending, but those cuts in spending are not, oh, we're cutting spending so it's too bad because we're hurting what we want to do. No, no, no. Because of how we're doing it, we're actually increasing our effectiveness to stand up against our adversaries, to fight for our allies, and to do it the right way. I'm exceedingly proud of this bill. It's not perfect. No bill is perfect. But I will tell you, sir, and the issues that you just brought up, and if I repeat myself in the category, if you just can't make it up, yeah, to be criticized, and I'm obviously respectful because I respect my colleagues, but when I see criticism in writing that, oh my gosh, this is horrible because we're cutting funding for the Wuhan lab, for gain-of-function research, for groups or institutions allied to the worst enemies of the United States, my answer to that is, you better believe that we are eliminating taxpayer money going to those wasteful and, by the way, hurtful issues, because it's not just wasting money, it's also hurting our national security interests. So I apologize for going on, but you can tell I'm proud and passionate about the work that my colleagues have done on this bill.
Well, I appreciate your work in prioritizing the interests of the vast majority of the American people and having tax dollars being focused on our efforts here. There might be more we can do, but we'll have those conversations and continue those through the amendment process and through the continuation of the development of this rule. But I appreciate that, and I think it's a giant step forward, and hopefully we can take some more. To my colleague, Mr. Joyce, and to my colleague from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, turning a little bit to Homeland Security. We've talked about it significant, and I won't repeat things we've said before about the state of the border, and the extent to which I know my friend colleague deals with it from Texas in particular, but all of us now in terms of the experience that we're feeling and facing on a daily basis, on what we're seeing with respect to fentanyl poisoning, what we're seeing with respect to the abuse of migrants. I know my friend from Texas, for example, is more than familiar with the dead bodies of migrants that we find on a daily basis, literally, in Texas. Just this morning, another report of, I think, a 10-year-old boy, this one might have been an adult. It was a 10-year-old boy last week who drowned, and his body was recovered in the Rio Grande. And this is now a recurring daily situation. And I know my friend's district, we both have representation in and around San Antonio. We had the horrific experience last year with those 53 human beings that died in a tractor trailer in the Texas heat. This is something that we're seeing now affect our constituents directly. Loss of loved ones, whether it's the fentanyl poisonings, seeing what's happening, the sex trafficking trade, the horrific stories, as I've recounted here with respect to my friend and judge, Reed O'Connor, upward departing because of the horrific facts, and a man, an illegal immigrant, but who was here in Baltimore, who paid his $1,000, and then his wife and daughter were being held for ransom. Unless he paid $23,000, they would get raped and abused. This is just now becoming commonplace, and as my friend said earlier, this is not Christian. This is not compassionate. And so I hope we are now, particularly with the eyes being opened with what's going on in New York and what's going on now increasingly in other cities around the country. I hope our eyes are being opened to this reality, because while my friend from Colorado, and I say respectfully, was talking about how we've had all the hearings and that we've been looking at this and, you know, looking at these facts. I mean, I've been talking about this issue, I mean, for years, but in this committee since January, and there's been a whole lot of, you know, kind of eye rolling and disagreement about the fact that this is a heightened issue and a level that needs to be addressed, that is having actual consequences with respect to human beings and their lives and the tragedy. So having said that, the question is, what do we do about it? And I want to start with an enormous amount of applause and respect for my colleague for putting together a Homeland Security package that has riders and has important language in the bill that will take steps towards forcing this administration to do its job. And I would hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would agree that it should be a nonpartisan truth that we should hold the executive branch accountable. And I've said this before, and I introduced legislation that took positions when President Trump was in the White House to do that. I would hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would join us now to do that, because this secretary and this president are blatantly disregarding their duty to figure out this problem. And it is a problem that must be dealt with now. Not walking through a presidential election to set some sort of debate about what may or may not occur in January of 2025, but sitting here today, now. So I applaud that this appropriations bill takes significant steps to, for example, deal with the CBP One app that is being abused to use parole on a categorical basis to take people and process them into the United States, yielding yet another record number that we're dealing with here in August and September, well over 200 and something thousand encounters, as I know my friend from Texas in particular knows these facts. The swelling numbers in Eagle Pass that we're seeing right now, the people in train cars and open containers coming here, the thousands mounting in the Darien Gap, people getting overrun, filling up our hospitals, our schools, law enforcement overrun in Texas. I don't know how much is too much for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to recognize how important it is to shut down the abuse of the border. And that is just a simple reality. And we're talking about shutting down the government. Well, to avoid shutting down the government, why don't we do our job to shut down a wide open border and force it into actually compliance with the law? That's the question. And that's the question that every American right now is watching. And I know that some of my Democratic colleagues are starting to recognize that reality, finally. Whether they're recognizing it enough. And to my colleague who mentioned like a seat at the table on these issues, my friend from Texas, I'm happy to talk anytime. We've done bills together, introduced legislation together. Happy to. But I'm just going to say from my position, it begins and ends with the President of the United States respecting the laws of the United States and actually enforcing the laws of the United States. And that's not happening, which gets to the crux of this that I have to ask when we talk about what we're trying to accomplish here. We're trying to pass language, and I hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would agree, to say that the funds can only be used to carry out the law, that the funds can only be used not to dump people into the United States, for example, under a categorical parole authority or use of, as my friend from Texas referenced, asylum in such a way that is counter to the question of whether or not an individual is here because of a persecution based on religious beliefs or some other category that we've put into the law, which everyone knows was done from a faithful Christian or other faith walk perspective of humanity and compassion to give someone a door, a respite, if they're being chased and persecuted, but not as a big neon sign that says we're going to weld the gates open in Arizona and just say walk right on in. Because that's what this administration is doing, and everybody knows it. And it is not good for the migrants. It is not good for the people that we represent. So I wonder if the chairman of the subcommittee could explain a little bit more. I know you did in your opening statement about the specifics of what you were trying to accomplish with the language in the bill currently.
Thank you very much for that request, and I'm glad to do so. What we've done is tied the language. First off, let me It is, but I'm not
Okay,
near
all
it.
right, sorry.
Oh, there we go. First, let me back up. What a CR does was give the same money that they've been getting in policies and procedures that all of us dislike. Will stay in place. When we put down this appropriation bill, we meaningfully tied all the verbiage and all the procedures to the fact that it would be the implementation, give or take, of HR2 and how we get about that, and how we're going to process people at the border, how we're going to have more beds for detention, how, if they're going to be released, that we're going to have alternatives to detention that stay in place the whole time until their case is done. It's only a 6-week thing now, where they check them once and then off they go. And so we want to set in place those type of mechanics so that if this administration won't put the word out, the people on the street, if you will, are going to put the word out that the borders are starting to shut down, that they're no longer going to be welcome here, that they're going to be detained, and that we're going to do the job that's necessary to shut down the border and follow the laws. We are a nation of immigrants, and we are a nation of laws, and those two don't have to live in conflict. They could come here. There's a statutory way in which they could come here, and they need to make application and do so. But to come here and be given free entrance into the country isn't right for all those people who did their job and are now citizens who waited in line and followed the proper procedures. Our bill is tied to making sure the border is shut, that fentanyl, which I agree with you, my distinguished colleague Roy, on the fact that if some country was killing 80,000 kids a year, we declare war on it. And we should declare war on this right now, wherever it is. And I don't give a damn if it's coming from China or it's coming into Mexico. Wherever it comes, whoever had their hands on it that's killing our kids deserves to be brought to justice on this, because it's not right, it's not fair. We've all lost friends, family, and other folks and other countrymen because of this. And if people don't see that, we're going to have to force them to see it through this bill.
The gentleman from South Carolina was asking for me to yield for a few seconds.
I just want to add to what Chip said about the deaths. We're getting daily calls now. A good friend of mine had his son, 26, shot in the back by an illegal. Now, South Carolina is 1,925 miles from Mexico. They're putting them in cities all over the country. But I've had probably 6 close friends of mine getting shot and killed. Not just police officers. This guy was a police officer, but this was a social worker who got murdered by an illegal alien, the rapes. So I don't know what more it's going to take for this president to put a stop to it. So I yield back. Thank you.
The district I represent is about 100 miles from the border. Obviously, our friend, Mr. Gonzalez, is on the border. Obviously, our friend here, Mr. Cuellar, is on the border. And we've visited many times, together down there. And, yeah, sure. I would yield to the gentleman. You seem to want to jump in.
Yeah, no, thank you. And look, we're all on the same page. We want to secure the border. Nobody wants open borders. I certainly don't want open borders. We just got to figure out how we get there. But it takes a little input from all of us. I mean, I know we got a lot of smart folks on the Republican side, but there's some of us on the D side that we can contribute in getting there. And that's what we're asking. And we're just asking, how do we get there? You talk about the wall. Some of us forgot that somebody had said that Mexico was going to pay for the wall. So why have the taxpayers do that when we can use the monies to provide more security at the border? Most drugs will come in. If you talk about fentanyl, 90 to 94% will come through the checkpoints or the ports of entry. Why not put more money there? Why not jam where the fentanyl is coming from, where the precursors are coming in through 2 ports of entry in the Pacific side of Mexico? Let's jam it over there before they get over here to our U.S. side. If you want to stop drugs, look at the ports of entry. If you want to talk stopping folks, you got to have repercussions at the border. We're on the same page on that. But also keep in mind that people come into the U.S. so many ways. The number 1 visa overstays come from not Mexico, but actually comes from Canada. Nobody's talking about a wall between the U.S. and Canada, but that's the number 1 violator of visa overstay. So again, all I'm saying is when we talk about border security, let's be smart on how we secure the border itself. That's all. And I emphasize that. I don't know if you've been getting what I've been saying. We ought to put more resources outside the 1-yard line called the U.S. border. We ought to provide Homeland the authority to do more outside the U.S. border called the 1-yard line. And if we extend it over there and let Homeland do what they need to do outside the 1 yard line, I think we can be a lot more effective to stop drugs and folks are not supposed to be coming in.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Could you explain to these folks, because I've heard it from you, and obviously you have a tremendous amount of expertise living in it every weekend when you go home, what you're talking about exactly by that, so they understand about because that's something that we're all going to have to act on here in Congress to make that happen.
Yeah, and what we're talking about giving Homeland authority is there's certain, Homeland already has authorities to do certain things outside. They can pre-clear, they can do certain things outside before goods come in. But if we give them the authorities, and there's a proposed language that I think I've showed both of y'all, is to let them do where they can work with governments outside, the ones that are willing to work with us outside, where if they do certain work out there, instead of, once they go through that process, instead of having folks being deported here, they can actually do that with other governments. In other words, certain things that Homeland can do outside that they're doing at the border, give them that authority outside the border itself. And by the way, you know, we need to provide more money for ICE, air ICE. You want to talk about comparisons, Mr. Norman? If you look at after the Title 42 went away, Title 42 from May 12th to just about a week ago, and you compare it to the same period of time, 2019, where there was another administration, this administration actually deported 253,000 people to over 150 countries, compared to about 160,000 that was done over the same period of time. I'm just saying all I'm saying is, let's agree that we want to secure the border. Let's just include people, other folks, not only Republicans, but Democrats and the Senate. I guess we got to include the Senate.
So the
right?
question is, so getting back to time here, on a couple of the issues that you've raised. So you talked about the wall. I can't remember when you came to Congress, but I don't know if you remember. Did you overlap with Sylvester Reyes?
I did.
So Sylvester Reyes, who had been a former Border Patrol agent, supported construction of a wall in El Paso, a Democrat. He did so because he thought it was critically important for maintaining control of the borders inside of El Paso. Most of the evidence has indicated that it has been highly successful at managing the flow within the city of El Paso. Obviously, people go around. That's kind of the point. With respect to McAllen and Brownsville, I think the gentleman would recognize the traffic comes predominantly in the areas where there is not infrastructure and walls.
If you would allow me, I think that is wrong.
Well, I'm holding on to my time for a second. I'll let you answer. The fact of the matter is, in terms of the data, in terms of what Border Patrol has testified to and said here in this House, the traffic has predominantly been around the areas where there is no walls sitting in those two cities side by side. And, I mean, present what you want to say. I'm going to say that is what's been testified to in the Judiciary Committee before me. Now, maybe you've had different testimony. But I'm telling you what has been testified to us under oath here in the House of Representatives. The extent to which the wall that was created in California in the mid-1990s, the traffic went from something like 600,000 down to maybe 30 or 40,000, immediately following the creating of the triple-layered barriers. Now, where I will fully agree with the gentleman is that you can build a wall all the way from the Gulf of Mexico to San Diego, and it could be 100 feet high and 100 feet wide. But if you're going to weld the doors open, and if you're going to tell the world that you will be released into the United States, no matter what, if you come here and utter magic words, then that infrastructure is completely irrelevant. So my point is, of just saying all of that is, we don't need to debate the wall. I support figuring out how to continue to get it. And one more thing on the wall to the gentleman saying about who's paying for it. Well, who left the parts sitting rusting in fields in the state of Texas? Who is paying people not to build the wall, as this administration has been doing? Who is now trying to say they're selling the wall parts off instead of actually doing what was already appropriated? And by the way, passed under law in this body, the Secure Fence Act, with language going along with saying you shall construct the wall. This body spoke and then had language defining operational control that the Secretary of Homeland Security came before our committee and when presented with the definition, said, yes, we are following that. We do have operational control, said it multiple times under oath, and then later the following year came back before the same committee and said, oh, I wasn't talking about that definition, even though it was the very definition presented with it. Obviously, out of respect to my good friend, I'll yield to you to respond.
And again, thank you. Look, I can't show this, but I'll leave it somewhere. I'll leave it somewhere.
Gentleman's,
You can hand it to
gentleman's
me.
free to pass it
Henry,
to
you can
him.
hand
and
it.
just-
I will. Look, if you look at Laredo, it's the second lowest crossing of people coming in. We don't have a fence there.
Right.
No, let me finish.
It's not the
No, no,
it's not
no,
the place
no,
where people are
let-
passing.
Let me.
Eagle Pass right now is all the population because they're moving. The cartels are moving them there. Go ahead. I yield.
West Texas is the lowest crossing area. They don't have a fence, or they might have God's
There's nothing
wall
out there.
I'm just telling you the
There's
different
literally no one there.
different border patrol sectors. Laredo doesn't have a fence, and we don't have the crossings. We're the second lowest crossings it is. If you look at the numbers where most people are coming in, it's where we have a fence. Why? Because there's two profiles of individuals.
Eagle
coming in.
Pass?
No, can I finish?
Eagle Pass?
Gentlemen, just,
It's your
if
time.
I interrupt again, I'm enjoying the debate, so I don't want to stop it.
It's your time. Or
But
it's my time, but
just
your
please
day.
don't talk over one another, because the stenographer has to get it out. I am. I've shown up with my
Let me,
Coke, I
let-
have
let-
popcorn,
yeah.
it's a good debate. Gentleman from Mr. Roy controls the time.
That's what we're supposed to do. Henry.
Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you. If you look at the fence in Texas, you have a river. The middle of the boundary is in the middle of the river. You don't have a fence there, right?
I mean,
Correct?
Governor
There's
Abbott
not.
might disagree at the moment, but yeah.
There's not. So the next closest place will be the riverbank. We don't have a fence by the riverbank for the 1,200 miles. Why? Because there's a treaty, and plus it's going to be washed away. So where is the fence in Texas? Well, we have river. It's a quarter of a mile or a mile away. So the two profiles of individuals coming in are the ones that are trying to evade and the ones that say, aquí estoy, I'm ready to turn myself in. So what they do is they touch the riverbank, they can claim asylum, they walk up a quarter of a mile or a mile away to where the fence is, whether you have a gate or no gate there. They'll come in and say, Border Patrol, here I am, and they turn themselves in. So how does the fence stop those asylum seekers when they're a quarter of a mile away? And again,
So I'm going to respond to that, and I'll give you the time back. Because this administration is creating the environment for that to occur. Because when we were having a proper debate about a fence, it was when we actually had individuals, including Jay Johnson, a Democrat, who said 1,000 a week was an emergency, who actually wanted to try to enforce the law. And now it says, oh no, we're just going to say if you come here onto this dirt and utter those magic words, like I already conceded, a fence is only as good as the willingness of the people to enforce the law. So all I'm suggesting is that, you asked for time back. I'll
So
go back.
therefore, the fence doesn't work. You just proved my
No.
point because
Hold on.
it is the repercussions. You got to have repercussions. If you don't have repercussions, a fence is not going to work. Or with or without a fence, you have to have repercussions. You got to have the right policy. We're in agreement there.
So we agree on that, except to say that therefore a fence doesn't work because you open the doors and because you say if you come up to the line, you say if you welcome them in, the fence doesn't work. The fact is, fences, of course they work. And the question is fences plus law plus enforcement. The fence at the White House is only as good to know as if you're going to get your head blown off if you go over it. That's literally only as good as the fence will work. But it's there to stop flow and traffic. And if you cross the fence, there will be consequences.
So therefore, if you have a fence a quarter of a mile away or half a mile away from the river, how is that effective? You're now talking about policy. I'm talking about fence. We're
It's
talking about the
effective if
fence.
you
We're
enforce the
talking-
law.
You got to have.
So in getting to the enforcement of the law, does the gentleman agree that the ICE memo under this administration, the guidelines for the enforcement of civil immigration law, and Kerry Doyle's memo, follow up, or any similar successor memos that are not allowing for the actual prosecutors to do their job because it's using prosecutorial discretion to say, don't enforce, that's undermining ICE enforcement.
So, and I support ICE, but we're talking about the fence. Let's talk about the effectiveness.
But if you let people into the country and you don't enforce the law,
Gentlemen,
period,
again,
how
please,
good is
you
it?
can't talk over one another. As much as an Oklahoman, I enjoy watching Texans fight. Got to do it one at a time.
If we're talking about the effectiveness of the fence, that's one thing. If you want to talk about policy, that's a different thing. And so on policy, we got to have repercussions. And going back to why we're here, why are we here? We ought to be focusing on a CR so we can have time. We got 7 days, 8 days to make sure the government's shut down. If we have a government shutdown, I've talked to Border Patrol, talked to them right before this meeting, talked to them last night, I've been talking to them because I live at the border. I don't just go visit the border. And I talk to them. I see them at church, I see them at stores, I see them everywhere. They're worried about it. Yeah. And if we have a shutdown, we ought to defund Border Patrol. I don't want to defund Border Patrol. I want to make sure that we provide the money. They are going to be very demoralized if they have to keep working and not get a paycheck on it. And I agree.
Well, the gentleman agreed that they are massively demoralized in their current state and that they're sitting there at 19,000 out of 22,000. Would the gentleman agree that he has talked to Border Patrol agents who are demoralized right now?
They're going to be more demoralized.
Are they demoralized right now?
They don't like the way things are going right now. And they're going to, surely in 8 days, they're going to really not be very happy.
Well, but the gentleman would agree. They're demoralized right now based on the fact that this administration, in the words of Border Patrol, almost universally, not just the union, but the line guys that I know I've talked to, a lot of the same guys, that they're demoralized because they're sitting there saying, we can't do our job. We're processing people. And we're not patrolling the borders. The gentleman agreed that that's what we're hearing.
I agree. I've looked at the surveys of Border Patrol over the years, and they're probably one of the hardest hit on morale. So they're right now, they were there 4 years ago, and if we don't do something and provide them the paycheck that they deserve, they're going to be very demoralized.
So understanding that political...
The answer is yes. But they've been demoralized, and they will be more there right now, and I agree with you on that.
Right,
but
and
if we don't give them a paycheck, I can tell you they're going to be really pissed off.
So I'll concede and agree that of course they want their paycheck. Everyone does, and of course Border Patrol will say that. But it's really important to understand that they're sitting there looking at that and saying, yeah, we want change though, because we can't watch more of our guys get so demoralized that their suicide rates are way up. They're coming to us and saying, guys, we're running out of the ability to keep doing this. That's the thing. Like, so we all get this. And so we can go round and round about the fence, whatever. But yeah, you're right. And you think you're making the point that, oh, because the fence is a quarter mile in or 100 yards in or 1,000 yards in, that means the fence doesn't work. I'm making the point that says, of course the fence will work if you actually enforce the law. And then if people come there, they know, well, you can come to the fence, you can say hi. Or you can come to the gate and say, hey, can I come in? And you can say, no, you got to go to port of entry and you got to have a passport. Otherwise, you got to say, hey, I'm coming here seeking asylum, and it's very specific. And we send a message to the world. If you just say asylum, that ain't going to do it. Magically, everything would stop. And then we would have an actual honest debate about what you raised about the ports of entry. Because the real problem is, yes, we have drugs coming in through the ports of entry. Of course we do. I've sat in the same scanners that you've sat in, looking at the scanning trucks. We get 1 out of 10 that we're able to actually put through the scanner. So, okay, maybe we could talk about a budget with more scanners. But if you have everybody sitting there processing people in tents and they're not patrolling the border, then you have individuals who are getting into this country like how many gotaways, to my friend from Texas? 1 million? 1 million gotaways? Is that what we think we've had under this administration? What number do you think?
So there's been getaways under all different administrations.
1 million?
But let me say this. Let me say this wonderful debate that we're having, discussion that we're having. You're making my point. Well, we need a CR because we need time to work this out and get it done. So why don't we focus, instead of trying to get something that may or may not pass next week and not enough time, let's sit down, get a CR, so you and I can continue having this discussion.
Well, so I had
Let
a,
me.
there was some,
Let me interrupt.
yeah.
Chair in this committee is traditionally always enormously generous with the time and will continue to be. But I would just remind both of you, we have a lot of members. A lot of
I'll end my
members
time.
here that need to testify. They're here on a Friday afternoon. I know they've got other places to go. So if we can move along expeditiously.
I will, deference to the chairman's request, I will wind down. But I will say this. I will say this. You know, smirks notwithstanding, I will say this. This issue is not going away. This issue merits far more debate than even we just had right here. This issue is going to get resolved. This is a non-negotiable reality for the representatives from Texas that we resolve this issue, and increasingly people around this country. And so whatever people want to do in terms of how we're going to fund government, this gets fixed. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen.